So you want to cosplay as Miya Chinen from Skate the Infinity. From the jacket, to the socks, to the long sleeve. This is the tutorial for you. We'll begin with the light green, cat-eared hoodie. I started by tracing the front and back panels of a zip-up hoodie I already owned onto my green fabric, following the outline around the neckline and armholes very carefully, and then cutting them out. After pinning the front panels to the back panel, along the side and shoulder seams, I sewed along these lines to create a vest. For the sleeves, I patched together 2 shades of green, since I would not have had enough of the lighter green fabric to complete the entire hoodie. So just to tie everything in, I also added this contrast green strip along the bottom edge of the vest. Copying the bell curve shape of the sleeve from my sample hoodie, I cut this out, 1/2 at a time, because my humble pair of scissors could not handle the fabric on the fold. Then I lined up the center of the sleeve with the shoulder seam and sewed all the way around the armhole until I got to the bottom seam. At this point, I overlapped the edges of the sleeves together first, trimmed off any excess, and then closed up that small gap in the underarm. I hemmed both of the sleeves after that. I've linked a really good tutorial to make welt pockets in the description for you to check out. But I'll show you how I did mine in case you also decide to take some pre-existing pockets off of your old pants and use them too. Cutting 4 identical pieces of orange felt, I put 2 together with the right sides facing for each pocket and sewed along 3 of the 4 sides, the shorter 2 edges and one of the long sides. Once this was done, I cut off any excess fabric around the edges, clipped off the corners, and turned the welt pieces right sides out, finishing it with a top stitch so that everything lies flat. Then, mapping out on the front panels where I wanted the welts to be, I marked out the length for the pocket opening along this line and cut a slit at this mark, making triangular cuts on both ends. I then folded these edges over and sewed around this rectangular shape. Next, I aligned the welt with the rectangular opening, sewed it down, then flipped it over so the raw edge was no longer showing and stitched over it again. Now for the actual pocket bags. I seam roped all of the beige fabric that was left from when I cut the pockets off of the pants they were previously on. Then once they were separated, I put a couple of stitches over where the buttonhole used to be and around the existing welt pocket to keep the remaining layers together. Then I sewed the pocket bag to the inside of my front panel, making sure that the rectangular opening of the pocket bag lines up with the rectangular space in the jacket. This was quite tricky as it was, and would have been impossible to do without my free arm on my sewing machine, which I was able to slide into the pocket bag for me to reach all of the seams and not to end up sewing the entire pocket shut. Now I can close up the top of that pocket bag. Finally, to finish everything off, I sewed the 2 short ends of the welt down to secure them. Here's where we are so far. Functional pockets. Super proud of these pockets, the amount of effort that went into them. But yeah. Time to make the hood. So using my hoodie as a template, I drew and cut out 3 panels in both my green and purple fabric, so that the green would be the outer layer and the purple would be the lining. I then sewed up both of these. Then I freehand sketched the swirly purple markings that go right on the top of the hood, trying best to reference the images of Mia's hoodie as closely as I could. I'm pretty happy with how they turned out, so I cut them out, leaving a decent amount of seam allowance around all of the curves and edges. After this, I draped the shape, which is like a purple splash looking thing, over my green hood and pinned everything down so the swirls were lying in the correct places. Now, to sew them into position, I made little snips every couple of centimeters along the curve to allow the seam allowance to follow the rounded shapes so that I could get some really smooth curves. While I was at it, I also cut out some purple and white circles for the eyes and sewed those on too. After that, I attached the lining to the hood by placing the 2 sides right sides together and pinning all along the edge. Then I sewed them together with a straight stitch. Flip the layers so the right sides are now facing outwards. To make the channel for the drawstring to go through, I measured the correct width and then top stitched at this measurement all around the edge. And I frayed my shoelace through that, pulling it all the way through so that now the hood can be cinched. Alright, it's time to make some ears. Initially, I tried to make them out of the lighter green fabric, but that fabric was just too thick to be turned inside out properly, so I switched to the other green fabric. The ears are these rounded triangular shapes, which I cut 4 of and then sewed 2 together to make 1 ear. Then I did the same thing with my purple fabric. And while this does seem like I'm doing double work, my purple fabric is just not thick enough to hold the structure on its own, so it will need the green ears underneath for support. I snipped the top corners so I could get as sharp a point as possible to turn the triangles right side out, and then I put the purple shell over the green shell before stuffing both ears firmly with some batting. Moving over to hand sewing, I attached the ears on top, and that's a wrap on the hood. So I've got the finished hood and pretty much the finished jacket, and I just put them together, add the zipper, and then the jacket is done. Cutting a long rectangular strip of fabric, I folded it in half lengthwise to create a collar. Placed the collar onto the hood, which I then placed onto the body of the jacket and pinned all 3 layers together. Sew along this raw edge, making sure to leave a gap where the drawstrings are so that they can still slide freely. The separating zipper goes in next, which I first sew face down to the front panel. When I get to a section where the zipper pull will interfere with the sewing, I make sure that the needle is down in the fabric, and then I lift the presser foot up. This allows me to slide the zip past where I've already sewn, so the sewing path will now be unobstructed. Flip to top stitch before repeating this on the other side. Please just look at how much thread I have left. That's cutting it way too close. But luckily, I finished the top stitching, and the zip is fully functional and complete. And the final touch for the jacket is the tail. I drew and cut out a curled tail shape on the fold to get 2 identical pieces. Then sewing these together, I snipped around the coil just to make it easier to turn right side out and stuffed it with batting, just like the ears. After that, all that was left to do is to sew it into the jacket on the bottom inside seam, and with that, the jacket's all done. Moving on to the next signature piece, the dark pink and blue striped long sleeve. This is an excellent opportunity to upcycle 2 of your tops at once. First things first, I undid the hem at the bottom of my navy blue t-shirt, so I have as much fabric to work with as possible. My plan is to only cut off the bottom end of the t-shirt and use that for the stripes, so that what remains will still be a wearable crop top. Pretty nifty, right? So after releasing the hem, I marked the point where I wanted to crop the t-shirt at, and then drew a straight line across so I could make the big chop. So turning my attention to the fabric offcut, I folded this strip in half lengthways and then cut it again, making 2 long rings of fabric, 1 ring for each sleeve. Working with the first strip, I brought the cuff of the long sleeve to measure how wide to cut my fabric for each stripe, remembering that I'll need a little bit extra to account for seam allowance and also for the stripes as they get slightly wider as I go closer to the shoulder of the sleeve. Conveniently for me, this perfectly divided into 3, so I sewed them into tubes to make 3 stripes. Then checking the spacing of my stripes for my top and adjusting their positioning so that the widths of the pink and the blue are pretty much equal, I mark things out and then cut the pink long sleeve with a little leeway for the seam allowance. With the pink and the blue rings right sides facing, I then headed over to the sewing machine and sewed them together. Then I sewed alternating blue and pink stripes together with an overlock stitch, since the fabric is a little stretchy, making my way all the way down the sleeves. The last component that ties this whole look together are the socks. So I thought it was best to approach this with embroidery, since it will still allow the socks to stretch easily. Using double threading, that is, pulling the thread so that both lengths of the cotton are at the same length and tying a knot at the end, I started embroidering along the elastic section of my sock, as it provided a pretty good guideline to follow for how wide my stripe should be all the way around. Then I'm essentially using a satin stitch to fill in the band, but I wanted to try and save thread, so instead of stitching on both sides of the fabric, I brought up my needle right next to my previous stitch on the same side where I entered the fabric. And I continued in this method all the way around the cuff of the socks for both of them. For the little cat, I just freestyled the shape, again using a satin stitch to fill it in, and then using a back stitch to border the image. And that's it! Let's put all the pieces together along with some staples from my wardrobe and become Miya Chinen.
I hate everybody in their 20s with their life on track. Tell me who'd you kill to get there? Whole world saying I ain't shit. I've been testing how long that I could go without some self-care. New year, same me. I don't wanna get old if it'll change me. I'm still just a baby, still lost as I was when I was 18.
In addition to the 3 pieces that I made, I'm also wearing some blue fingerless gloves, black mid-thigh shorts, and of course, my boots. I am super happy with how everything turned out, and I just love how each piece, the hoodie, the striped long sleeve, and the socks, can be worn normally as everyday items as well. But yeah, let me know what you think of this project. Until next time, keep it jazzy.